Hello, and welcome to Learning Tree International's webinar entitled Privacy and Security Go Hand in Hand. Today's webinar will be jointly presented by two of Learning Tree's valued partners, Logical Operations and the International Association of Privacy Professionals. We are joined by Jeff Felice, Executive Vice President of Partners and Alliances for Logical Operations, and Alyssa Rosinski, Director of Global Channel and Partners at the IAPP. Jeff and Alyssa will spend the next 45 minutes discussing GDPR, data privacy, and cybersecurity, and the confluence of all three. Today's webinar is delivered via voice over IP. All microphones are muted, and we will take questions in the chat pod at the conclusion of the webinar. Please join me in welcoming Jeff and Alyssa as they explore the need for organizations to close the skills gap when it comes to data privacy.
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning, everyone. This is Jeff Felice. And again, I'm joined here with my colleague, Alyssa Rosinski from International Association of Privacy Professionals, or IAPP. And we are very pleased to speak to you today about the intersect of cybersecurity and data privacy focused on the GDPR, or the regulation out of the EU. We're going to start with a polling question, just to get a better understanding of where you are today. So our first question is, does your organization need to be in compliance with GDPR? So you can answer yes, no, or not sure. We'll give everyone a few seconds here to answer their questions. And as we're broadcasting our results here, you can see. So it looks like right now that roughly half of the people believe they need to be in compliance or know that they need to be. There's roughly 20% that don't think they need to be in compliance with GDPR. And there's roughly a third of you that are unsure. And that's what we hope to solve for you today, the puzzle of whether you need to be compliant or not. And obviously this is a webinar, and we would obviously ask you to seek any consultation from your legal department or other data privacy experts, but hopefully this will give you that first indication of where you need to be. So there's been a lot of questions in the industry of which is it? Is it cybersecurity or is it data privacy? And GDPR, which we'll learn more about in this webinar, is the most progressive and far-reaching data privacy regulation at this time. If you haven't heard about it, you will today, and probably more as we move forward. But as you can see on the quote on the left, data privacy professionals are concerned about the reliance on T, which is cybersecurity. And on the right, you can see the graphic depicts that IT professionals are the ones who are being relied on, report they are insufficiently prepared to tackle the requirements of data privacy. So we live in the midst of this conundrum of which is it? And the fact is, as we'll see, it's both. So when looking at security and data privacy side by side, as we are here, you'll notice that both are focused on the management and protection of data. A good way to think about the two and how they work together is to think of cybersecurity as a castle, buttressed with a moat and high walls, and built to keep it safe, its inhabitants. And think of the data as the inhabitants themselves. They come and go through the walls, and the queen ensures their safe passage and protection whenever they're within the walls. So you can see one doesn't exist without the other. And we'll further define these throughout the session today, but you'll see on the left-hand side, security is keeping the data safe. It's protecting, maintaining, controlling. And data privacy, again, we're talking about personal data. We'll talk about what that means in a moment. But it's about not only the security and collection of it, but also how do we use it, share, handle, and process that information. So we're going to first focus on cybersecurity. It may be a topic that's more familiar with many of the folks here. And then we'll speak in more depth about data privacy and spend most of our time with data privacy and specifically the GDPR regulation today. So another analogy we like to use is actually a piece of fabric, right? If anyone's ever knitted or done any type of weaving, et cetera, you know that a fabric is typically made up of an intersect of both horizontal and vertical threads. And the fact is that one cannot exist without the other, right? You take in weaving, if you take the horizontal threads out, then the vertical threads, they have nothing to bind them, and vice versa if you just were to take the vertical away. So you can see that if you think of security, cybersecurity, and data privacy as a piece of fabric, you really need to have the two. They need to be interwoven together. So bringing IT and data privacy together and thinking about it holistically as a single concern, although each of them will also have things that they have to deal with outside of one another as well. But we really like to look at it as, again, the intersect or the combination of the two. So thinking about security or a data breach, the fact is security breaches are often indistinguishable from privacy breaches, right? And we'll talk more about the recent Facebook breach. If there's anyone with Facebook or partner with Facebook, you know that Facebook is, takes security seriously, but they're also a target for many individuals that want to reach that data. So the fact is, from the security world, cybersecurity world, we look at that as a security breach. Yet, from a data privacy perspective, we're looking at that personal data and the records that were taken and potentially misused. And we look at that as from a personal data or data privacy perspective. And the fact is that in most cases of most cybersecurity breaches, the two, again, are interrelated. In most cases, the bad actors out there are attempting to breach a organization's infrastructure to obtain data. It may be other data other than personal data, but more often than not, and the ones we hear about the most and are probably most affected by, is personal data. And the biggest barrier to success for CIOs and CISOs, so your chief information officers and your chief information security officers, is really the skills and resources. So what we're seeing today is that, yes, there is budget. The fact is, lack of management understanding or sponsorship. There's always going to be technology challenges and alignment with the business. But the number one issue is organizations have reported repeatedly in the Gartner survey is that they don't have enough skilled personnel to help address their needs. And again, we'll talk about some potential solutions as we move further along. And what's also of interest here is the need to prepare everyone. There's a statistic widely published that 95% of all breaches begin with someone doing something, whether inadvertently or potentially with malicious intent, but typically an end user, essentially somehow, documenting, writing down a password, keeping it at their desk, plugging in a flash file, otherwise opening, logging in, going to a hotel, logging into a network that doesn't require any authentication, et cetera, and allowing someone to piggyback, downloading the keyboard logger, opening themselves up to a phishing or spear phishing attack, et cetera. The fact is that's how in most cases breaches, that's the entry point. It's not this level of sophistication that we see on television or in the movies. It truly is someone knowing or not knowing that they're doing something that is simple as clicking on a link or an email, or an attachment. So the fact is we really need to think about preparing everyone. And you'll see this is not only pertinent to cybersecurity, but also to data privacy. So when we think of the ecosystem of people that need to be informed and prepared, it's not just the security team or the data privacy team. It's also the IT personnel or the extended data privacy policy implementers, and then reaching out to all the employees. And again, we'll talk more about solutions as we go forward. But again, we really want you to think about this as not just it's your legal department or data privacy or cybersecurity concern. It is the organization's concern. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alyssa.
Thanks, Jeff. And a pleasure to be here and have this opportunity to speak with you all. My name is Alyssa, and I oversee the IAPP's global channel and partner program. And so I want to start off by telling you a little bit about the IAPP and who we are and what we do. So we are the world's largest professional association dedicated to the privacy and data protection community. I'm happy to say that even in the time when I had sent these slides over, we've had some growth in our membership, and that's something that we've been experiencing quite a bit over the past few years. I look today, and we have now 44,500 members in over 110 countries. And just to give you a sense of the growth that we're experiencing, I started at the IAPP about 7 years ago, and when I first came on board, we were just about to crest our 7,000th member. As you can see there, the EU membership that we have actually is a little bit more than that also. It's roughly around 13,300. And so this is just an area of explosion that we're experiencing. And this goes hand in hand with the growth in our training and our certification. We have over 16,000 certified individuals. And we'll talk obviously a little bit about that, the training and the certification piece of it, but this is really what's helping to drive the growth of the IAPP. And as you see in that last bullet point, our mission, we are here to define, promote, and improve the privacy profession globally. That's what we do every day. We have this mission and take it very seriously. This is a very serious topic that affects nearly everyone. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry. So exactly, what is privacy? It's called a lot of different things, and it is something different to many people. We call it here, sometimes we'll hear it data privacy, data protection, information privacy. It's certainly different things to different people. And with that, there are cultural and contextual differences. So let me just give you an example of some of the cultural ones. When we look at the United States, say, versus Europe, it's a fundamental human right in Europe. And here in the US, I would say in the past, I think this is changing, and that's good. We would have maybe given out, for example, our Social Security number without giving it too much thought before. I know our CEO had visited India in the past, and there was always, like you would go to talk about privacy, and kind of the response back would be about security and controls. And so there's these notions, and while they are changing as this topic of privacy has been thrust into the spotlight recently, and we see in many of the new emerging markets, privacy in this concept is rather new, and there are deep-rooted ideas of what it means, and those sometimes are not easily changed. In terms of contextual differences, we have the notion of privacy and personal space. I was doing a presentation last week and needed to ask my children what they thought about privacy and what did it mean to them. So I asked our 10-year-old daughter, and she said, like shutting the bathroom door. And then I asked our 13-year-old son, and he said, only having his closest friends as part of his text group. And then I went another step further, and I asked my parents, and they basically are, on lockdown, and it's like Fort Knox for anything computer or cell phone related. So there's this, difference in how we look at it. And I also think there's an interesting notion about privacy and as it adapts to social norms. What was once common, so think about the news feed that used to be down that right-hand side of your Facebook feed that showed what all your friends were commenting on and doing. That went away because there was enough backlash about it that people didn't like it. So privacy is evolving and changing rapidly, and so we're trying to keep up with it here at the IAPP. So in the United States, there's an array of privacy laws that apply to different sectors, people, or industries. So, for example, we have COPPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And this applies to that online collection of personal information, for children that are under the age of 13. I'm sure most of us on this webinar are aware of HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And those are the forms that we all sign each time that we go into our doctor's office, that safeguards our medical history and our personally identifiable information with regards to our medical history. We have CAN-SPAM, which is the Controlling and Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing Act. That's the law that sets the rules for those commercial emails that we receive and whether we want to opt out of some of those in the marketing messages. And then most recently, you may have heard of CACPA. It's kind of a funky acronym, but this is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And this is actually set to take effect in January of 2020. And unless we somehow see a piece of federal privacy law supersede this, we are going to have a very robust privacy law coming out of California. And now we're going to add to this mix, or we added to this mix, I should say, the General Data Protection Regulation, or better known as GDPR. This went into effect Friday, May 25th. So we're approaching our 6-month mark on it. It's one of the largest pieces of legislation with a global remit. And this isn't just a European piece of legislation, but one that everyone is having to wake up and recognize the globalness of it. If you are an American company, American-based company doing business in Europe, or you are holding on to EU citizens' data, then you are subject to the requirements under GDPR. And just know that this piece of legislation has, changed the landscape of data protection and how businesses operate on a global scale. Some companies spent the past 2 years preparing for it, and others are just starting. And now that we're 6 months into this regulation, since it went into effect, certainly companies are wondering, when will the first enforcement action happen, and which company will it happen to? And I would say that we are really only in the nascent stages of this regulation. There's still much more ahead, and companies can't afford to sit back and think that non-compliance is okay, or they won't come after, us. And so we're here today to talk about some of the things that you can do with regards to this. And so now I think, Jeff, we're going to hit another polling question. Is that right?
That's correct. So the next polling question is, does your organization have a data governance program currently in place? Getting some answers here. Broadcast these results as they come in. And you'll see that roughly we have 3/4 that have some level of data governance. That's moving down. It's going somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4. And then we have roughly 20% of folks are unsure, and a slightly lesser amount that don't have one today. So in totality, we're looking at 1/3 of the people that don't have one or not sure, and 2/3 that have something in place, whether it may or may not be entirely compliant with GDPR today.
Great. So where are these practitioners coming from, these nearly 45,000 members that make up the IAPP membership? For many years, the IAPP was comprised mostly of lawyers. This was in our earlier years. We are 18 years old, so pretty still new in terms of professions. But with this explosion in privacy, we now have members that are joining us from all different industry sectors. We have in the past called them adjacent professions, and that's not really true anymore. I would say that anybody touching data, and that goes for human resources, finance professionals, marketing, IT, InfoSec, customer service, they are all part of the privacy profession. What company doesn't have troves of data that they're collecting and using as, about their customers to do their business better? In this information economy, all of these employees, regardless of where they sit in an organization, who come in contact with this data have to be knowledgeable. They have to be aware at a minimum for what they can or can't do with somebody's personally identifiable information before a costly mistake happens. And what's the best way to mitigate that risk and become an enabler within the organization? A solid privacy and data governance program. It shows at a minimum that steps within an organization are being taken to create a culture of privacy, and nothing can be more powerful than that. And so how are companies doing this? They are training their employees. The IAPP has 3 different domains of our certification, and it's broken down into what you'll see here, the CIPP, which is our Certified Information Privacy Professional. This is, it has different regional flavors. We have a European one, so CIPPE. We have a US, Canada, we have and Asia. And this really is the what of privacy and data protection. It goes into the laws and the policies, frameworks, as you see, regulation, and it'll do a deep dive into that. Then we have what's called the Certified Information Privacy Manager, CIPM. And this really is the how of privacy. How do you operationalize privacy within your organization? How do you conduct a data flow audit, a privacy impact assessment? How do you create a governance structure and build out a team of privacy professionals? Last, we have our Certified Information Privacy Technologist, and this is really privacy for the IT professional. So it's going to talk about privacy by design. How are you and your, say, your engineers or your those that are creating from the whiteboarding session, how are they thinking about privacy in controls and systems from the very beginning? I will note, as you see, that our CIPP, our CIPM, and our CIPT are all accredited under the ISO standards, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple slides. Actually, we're going to talk about it right now. So why does certification and membership matter? So the IAPP certifications are ANSI accredited under the ISO standards, and this, I feel, is a huge differentiator. Our exams are continuously measured for reliability and validity. We perform job task analyses every 3 years. We work with psychometricians and exam managers who conduct standard setting meetings and performance health checks. And we ensure that the certified individuals merit recertification. The level of work that our certification team does demonstrates our integrity, and our strong commitment and management to this process ensures our adherence to these global standards. It's a really rigorous process that we keep up with on a yearly basis. And this directly goes into the membership piece as well. A key differentiator is that we support an individual throughout their career. The support just doesn't stop once the training is complete. And this is demonstrated through all of the events that the IAPP holds all over the world. We have, I think now, about 12 or 13 signature events from Singapore and Brussels to Toronto and Washington, D.C., and we just launched one in Munich, and we're launching one in Paris, so that's one way. We have content and publications and member benefits, such as an extensive online resource center, one section completely for the GDPR. And so this is information and content that our members can access as part of their membership, and they gain those practical tools that they can take back and use in their daily application of the job that they're doing out there. We also have what we call local knowledge net chapters, and these are educational networking events that take place in cities all over the world. And this gives our members the ability to network with those individuals that are also doing the same very important work that they are doing as well. So let's talk about, what's required. So I'm not going to go through all of the verbiage on this particular slide, but what I do want to highlight is that these are the various articles that are within the GDPR, and this is three separate areas, and essentially all of them, if you read through, have training requirements, and that is part of the General Data Protection Regulation. And so with that, I think we're going to head to our next polling question.
Great. And so this question is, what roles in an organization are required by GDPR to participate in data privacy? So you'll see several different options here. And again, just please answer what you believe to be the answer. There's no wrong answer here. Every organization is a little bit different. And again, what we're seeing right now, and I'll broadcast the results, is roughly 50% says all the above. 20% or so says all staff, and then there's smaller percentages for who's involved. And again, we'll go through this, but again, it's based on the organization. We would say everyone in the organization, so all of the above, or all staff. But again, they are participating in data privacy. But again, those that are establishing the policies, procedures, and the implementation of those, again, may be a smaller subset of good.
Yeah, and so if we put all this together, what we have been working with logical operations on is how to be the most effective for all of those that need to get trained, and certainly a subset that will need to get certified, but the most appropriate and effective offering for these individuals is the 4-day combination that include our CIPPE, so our European designation, and our CIPM. The pairing of this provides both an understanding then, as we talked about the law and the regulation itself through the CIPP, so the what, and then through the practice, and that's through CIPM, the how. And what's great about this for our training partners and logical operations training partners is that as individuals go through this, the second designation is an example, is priced at a lower rate, so it provides our partners with greater margin. And I should note that this is combined 4 days of training. Each day, each designation is 2 days of training. We also are working with Logical Operations with regards to our e-learning product, and that we call it Privacy Core. And so Privacy Core has 2 modules that are in there called, that we combined together to call GDPR Essentials. And those 2 modules are comprised of one called Data Protection Essentials, and the other is called General Data Protection Regulation. And so these are both about 2 20-minute modules that have various stopping points along the way that where the individual does assessments in both of those. And so the goal here is to have a solution for enterprise-wide training on GDPR that can demonstrate compliance. Okay, and so with that, I'm going to actually turn it back over to Jeff so that he can follow up on a couple of other pieces.
Great. Thank you, Alyssa. And similar with the management and protection of data, GDPR does not only focus on that, but also how an organization is to respond when a breach does occur. As you can see in the 2 relevant GDPR articles listed here, companies have 72 hours to report a breach once they become aware of it, and they must communicate that information to anyone whose personal data was affected. So a good example is you probably saw the recent incident report from Facebook. Again, not to pick on Facebook, but it's widely known. And they had a security breach recently that affected 50 million of its users. And unlike security breaches that have occurred in the past with maybe Facebook or other companies where they may have sat on that information until they fully understood the impact, et cetera, you saw that they reported this within 72 hours of uncovering the breach. And this is no coincidence, right? This is because of GDPR, which is now the prevailing data privacy regulation for global businesses. And to set the tone for future incidents, we can refer to the recent Uber fine, if you've seen that in the news, which, although predated GDPR, it fell in line with the expected penalties. For those who don't know, Uber learned in November of 2016, again before the implementation date of GDPR, that hackers had accessed personal data, including driver's license information, and for roughly 600,000 drivers in the U.S. The company acknowledged the breach in November of 2017, again predating GDPR, but it did say at that time it had paid ransom for the stolen information. So the hack also took the names and email addresses of a number of 57 million riders around the world, and after some management changes, their new chief legal officer decided to pay a fine in excess of $100 million that was paid to the 50 states and District of Columbia. And what's most notable about that is the amount paid was 2% of their annual revenues for that same year, which is the minimum penalty for a breach at lack of incident report. As we talked about earlier, well, we haven't spoken to it, but some of the penalties within GDPR are either for the greater of 20 million euros or about $25 million, or 4% of revenues. And those fines can be less in some cases, but you can see still for Uber, it was a significant fine. And again, depending on the size of your organization, those fines could equate to, again, thousands or many millions and even into the billions of dollars based on the size of your business. So the importance here is not only actually determining a breach, but now is you need to report that. You need to report it to the appropriate data protection authorities, but also inform the users that may have been affected. So there is an offering through a partner of Logical Operations, CertNexus. They have a course offering that's a 5-day cybersecurity training course. So this is where the other courses that are coming from the IAPP where are inclusive of a broad spectrum of individuals that are outside of IT and inclusive IT. Cybersec first responder are aimed at cybersecurity and IT professionals. So the idea being that whether you're a system administrator, who's essentially the first level of protection and support. Think about it, if you're a system administrator, a lot of system administrators don't have the requisite knowledge today to be able to engage with their security teams, and also don't have the understanding that they need to prevent, right? So if there's essentially a server seeing a high level of performance in a specific day, and they look at a log file and they don't understand, but hey, that's potentially a denial of service attack or some other type of attack, et cetera, right? Essentially, we're missing that first opportunity. So again, the intent is not only your security professionals, going back to the slide I showed earlier in the presentation, not just your security professionals receiving this training, but also your IT professionals. And again, the Cybersec First Responder, or CFR, it focuses on the 3 phases of cybersecurity. Essentially before, right, helping the prevention of attacks, so understanding threats and attacks. Essentially the during, right, so the data collection and analysis process. And then the response, so tools and techniques, a process, and a future vulnerability assessment. And again, it's imperative that your IT professionals, again, not only standing up hardware and software solutions, but essentially creating processes around those. And again, as we talked about earlier, is again that intersect of those processes and systems with data privacy itself. And this is just an example. There's obviously could be a number of training paths or learning paths for different types of individuals within your organization. But the idea here is not to prescribe a specific path, but more the understanding, again, that if you look at it, is that really data privacy and cybersecurity essentially encompasses your entire organization. Again, we're going to rely most heavily on the specialists, those that are focused on cybersecurity and data privacy and their roles, in folks essentially responsible for that day to day. But also, what about those other line managers or people in other functions in an organization? I look at it as, as a customer service manager, you're responsible for individuals that may be processing data every day, maybe even potentially financial data like credit cards. Human resources, you typically are collecting all your employee data, and you're typically housing that in an internal or potentially a third-party system. Within marketing, you're typically collecting contacts information, you're typically communicating out to them. What are the regulation laws that you need to comply with in that sense? And it goes on and on beyond that as well, but it just gives you a sense of the breadth of it and the fact that all these individuals have to have some information to ensure that they're not only in compliance and essentially, removing some of the risk, but also it's an investment in the company and the brand itself. And I think at this point we're handing it back over to Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Jeff and Alyssa. We do have a couple of questions that have come in that I'd like to address. The first is, what skills would an IT professional need to support the requirements of GDPR?
Right. Yeah, so for an IT professional, as we covered later on here, is it's about incident response, handling, and reporting. So, so that's going to be what you see kind of that is customer facing. So essentially understanding the breach, the impact of the breach on your organization, on the data of your customers, employees, partners, and then the reporting of that, again, now in that 72-hour period. So that's kind of the back third of it, right, which we talked about the after. But also, it's establishing the processes up front. So you're doing the appropriate upfront protection, right? So that could include pen testing, third-party ethical hacks. It's also setting up hardware and software solutions. It's developing processes so that data is not only being collected, but also analyzed. And through that analysis, doing active analysis, so not just passive analysis, and there's a slight difference between the two. And then also, again, having that waterfall outside of your cybersecurity department into your IT professionals, so those IT professionals have that same information so they can engage with your cybersecurity staff.
And thank you, Jeff. Our next question is, who besides a data privacy officer would benefit from the IAPP CIPM course?
Alyssa, would you like to take that one?
Sure. So for CIPM, and I was just actually going to chime in on this on the earlier one too, which is those individuals who are responsible for the management processes. And so you're going to look at whether, and again, it always is going to depend on how privacy and data protection is within an organization, and it varies within every single organization. But oftentimes there's, say, for example, different business units, and each different business unit will have somebody that's responsible for the management processes within that unit. And so those would be an example of who else you would need. We oftentimes see that privacy, if you're familiar, with project managers, and those project managers run horizontal throughout an enterprise. Privacy is going to be very similar as well, just so that all of the different departments are represented. And yet sometimes you're going to have it, it may come out of the law side of things or the compliance side. So it really is individual depending on the organization and their governance structure for it.
Thank you. We do have a question in the chat pod. So what is the difference between this cert and other certs such as CISSP?
Yeah, so CISSP, if you think about it, that's really intended for a cybersecurity leader, so a manager, director level is up to CISO. And the focus on that is, it's more theoretical. So if you look at, and I'll speak to cybersecurity first responder, CFR is the incident handling focused course. That is hands-on, that's for technical professionals, where CISSP is intended for leaders. And then again, the difference between CISSP and the IAPP offerings like CIPM, which is a managerial focused course, is, again, CISSP is focused on cybersecurity, so understanding threats, establishing policies, procedures, et cetera. But again, it's focused on the technology side of it, whereas the IAPP portfolio comes from the data privacy perspective. So it may be that you have a security leader that takes both, because again, as we go back to those earlier graphics, the two are complementary, and one really doesn't exist without the other.
Thanks, Jeff. We do have another question. How often should employees receive data privacy and cybersecurity awareness training?
Yeah, I'll speak to cybersecurity, and then Alyssa can speak to the data privacy. But from a cybersecurity perspective, it's recommended annually. The fact is that not only the concepts, but the way that, again, the bad actors are trying to infiltrate systems is continuously continuing to progress. Things that didn't exist 3 years ago exist today, and again, it'll be different again in 12 months. So we at Logical Operations, we actually have everyone in our organization go through compliance training on an annualized basis. Our belief is two things. One is that it's an ounce of prevention, and we really believe in that, and the amount of risk it mitigates. We also believe, though, that providing that information not only is around prevention, but it also demonstrates our commitment not only to our business, but to that of our customers and partners as well.
And I would echo what Jeff said, just even from the privacy side of things. And I would also say that one of the important things to point out is that there will be changes that happen with the regulation, and so the only way to stay up to date on top of that and make sure that that the staff is to have annual training. And so like logical operations, the IAPP, we do the same. We have annual training on all of this.
Thank you, Alyssa. And I believe one final question, unless we get more in the chat pod, is a data privacy officer required for every organization to be fully compliant with GDPR?
Alyssa, do you want
me to go? Or?
Yeah.
So data protection, depending on the size of the organization, so that's what will need to get taken into consideration. So while the size of some will require that they have their own individual data protection officer, other ones of certain sizes won't necessarily, they may have a shared data protection officer that happens with, amongst a number of different small companies. So.
Okay, thank you. I believe that's the end of the questions, again, unless someone wants to enter one in the chat pod. But as everyone can see, Learning Tree is offering 3 of the courses through our partnership with IAPP and Logical Operations. So these will be instructor-led training courses through Learning Tree. We do have the Certified Information Privacy Professional, the Privacy Technologist, and Privacy Manager. We, as Jeff mentioned earlier, the Cybersecurity First Responder course is an offering that we will be onboarding very soon to round out this privacy and cybersecurity offering. And one thing that I believe Alyssa mentioned, along with your course tuition, you do get a 1-year membership to the IAPP, so you will be able to remain current on any changes that occur with GDPR and other privacy laws. With that, I would just like to let everyone know that this webinar will be available on demand. An email will go out in the coming days with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar. I was just checking to see if any other questions were coming in. I believe okay, does Learning Tree offer the CIPP government course? Alyssa, can you update us on that? I believe that might be in revision.
Sure. So actually, more recently, the CIPPG is no longer a course that a certification that the IAPP, we retired it recently over the summer. And so we've taken some of the content of that particular course, and it's into our CIPP US. So, so the answer to that was exactly what was just shared before, which is the Certified Information Privacy Professional, the US designation, so that you're offering.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you, Jeff and Alyssa, for this very informative session today. Again, this will be available on demand for you to share with others in your organization over the coming days. So thank you to all who attended today, and please come back to learningtree.com and visit our website for more detail on these courses. Thank you.